Hello, good evening, everyone. So good to be back here today. I feel really excited today. I don't know. Um, it seems like I've had a pretty good weekend. Um, and then coming into today, so it's been a really interesting day for me. And I'm excited to be here. And I hope everyone is excited. So good evening from the UK. Good evening. I think it's 1 hour ahead in Nigeria today at the moment. Um, I don't know what time it is in the US, in Australia, in India, in China, wherever you're watching from. Welcome to Roadmap MBA, the platform where we are poised to bring business education to a minimum, I would say, of 5 billion people worldwide. It sounds scary, isn't it? But it's doable, and that's the vision we're sharing on this platform. It was conceived by Steve Pugh, who's a very good friend of mine and a great man, great visionary. Um, who felt that there was a need to create this platform to provide business education, live engagement, live connections, build a community of value creators, that would change the world literally. And I'm super excited to be part of the journey. I'm a guest presenter on the show. My name is Tony. So again, you're welcome. Just to mention, the mission is to help people around the world build a better life for themselves, creating an accessible platform for all communities to thrive and celebrate together. So what we do here is to reflect on specific topics, and just kind of learn together from ourselves. We do not claim to be experts, right? But what we do is to instigate the conversations, right? Throw up those conversations that ensure that people begin to think in a very appropriate way, in an innovative way, in a way that helps the world. And let me start by saying today, this month, in the spirit of mindfulness, right? You can see my puppy, right? This is the Remembrance Month. We're celebrating or remembering the fallen heroes, right? And to those areas, war-torn areas at the moment, we can take a minute to really remember the ongoing war in Ukraine, and the people that would have lost their lives, soldiers who are dying, from this mindless war that shouldn't have happened initially. We take a moment, or we using this month to remember them. And so that's why I've done this, just so we can, show our support. As a platform, we're also very mindful of the role our armed forces have put for the country, and all the armed forces around the world as well. So we're remembering them with this. And then, in the same spirit of mindfulness, right? We're looking at a topic that is really interesting. I'm sure if you have anyone who has been following the news, following, the media, you would know that there is a major event happening at the moment in the world, being hosted in Africa, in Egypt, precisely, which is the COP27. COP27. Until I started looking at this reflection today, I really didn't know the meaning of COP. So COP actually means Conference of the Parties, right? Conference of the Parties. So this is the 27th Conference of the Parties. So we felt that in a way to kind of increase or improve the sensitization around the whole climate conversation, it would be interesting to bring up this conversation today and reflect together. Really, like I earlier said, we're not experts in it, right? But we're just trying to stir up conversation here. And then we can begin to see how we can add our own efforts to solving this grand challenge, right? I don't know if this passes for a wicked problem, but it may be. But we all need to put in our own efforts to solving this problem, which is faced by the world. Nowhere is safe. In fact, I was listening to the opening remarks of Alok Sharma, the immediate past president of COP26, where he was giving his remarks. And then he mentioned, really, which is very disturbing, that a third of Pakistan is submerged under the waters at the moment. Nigeria, where I come from, is experiencing its worst flooding in a decade. So, is this topical? Yes, it is. Should we be talking about it? Absolutely. Should we be doing something? Definitely. So, it's just timely that we need to look at what we need to be doing as individuals, not just as businesses, right? Though I've said we're looking at these imperatives for businesses, but, we need to also look at what is the need for me as a person. Where do I come in? What do I need to do? Right? Because we need to, if you listen to that speech by Alok on the opening ceremony yesterday, a word that kept on reverberating in his speech was collaborativeness, collaboration. And in this journey of, in this collaboration, we're talking about government, we're talking about businesses, we're talking about individuals, right? So everyone has a role to play. But let's just take the next few minutes to reflect on this very interesting topic, net zero or real zero. And just a quick caveat, this actually was a research I did with a few of my colleagues during the MBA. And then, I did some updates on it, but majority of this were things that we kind of researched together during the MBA program, where we're trying to say, should we be talking about net zero or real zero? Which is very interesting. So we'll be reflecting on that, but to do that, we would tend to want to look at where we started from, the whole Paris Agreement, what really is net zero, what are we talking about when we say net zero, and stuff like that. We will just kind of go through a little bit of reflection and see if we can pick out some imperatives for businesses. So if you're a business person watching, you may want to stay tuned, because we'll be reflecting about how what's the role of businesses in this. How can we add, our own quota to this problem? How can we join to solve the problems, right? And then if you're an individual, you're a researcher, right? You're a student. You want to listen in to say, how can I use my research to help this cause, right? And then if you're just an individual, how can I improve my lifestyle or my day-to-day living to add something to this cause, right? So let's look at what we have in the next few minutes. So a quick puzzle, if you're there, just a quick puzzle, which I said, what's your estimate for the carbon footprint of the electric car compared to the gasoline-powered car? This is, I'm sure someone would immediately jump at smaller, because we've come to really understand over the time that the alternative, or the only alternative, is electric, right? But there is a little bit more to it. So just so we don't waste time, it really depends, and I will explain why I say it depends, right? The electric car, the understanding we have generally out there is that electric cars are generally more efficient and emit less carbon than the gasoline-powered cars. Over the long term, yes. But in the short term, no, because the amount of emissions that happen at the point of manufacturing the car, the electric car, is more than it is with the gasoline car. In fact, it is almost 40% more at the point of manufacturing the car. In fact, the statistics says that an electric car would have to have run for 50,000 miles, at approximately 48,000 plus, close to 50,000 miles, to equal the carbon emission of a gasoline car. So what usually we've been paying attention to is the tailpipe emission of gasoline cars, right? And there's been a lot of, we tend to forget what happens in the whole value chain of an electric car, right? And beyond the manufacturing, even the electricity that you get to use, which is a very silent point that we tend to forget, is that the electricity that comes into your house, which you charge your electric cars, right, goes through a process, isn't it? That come from power stations and stuff like that, which are actually, at the moment, 80% of them are manned or are, functioned by fossil fuel, right? So even the electricity that we're talking about also has some form of emission therein as well. So the question really would be, what kind of electricity are you using? So that's another question. So that's why I said it depends, because if you're using wind generated electricity, the emission on an electric car's value chain or life cycle reduces drastically than if you're using a mix of other coal-powered power stations and stuff like that. So you can see that the real question that we probably need to be asking is, should we be focusing on real zero, right? Because when you talk about net zero, and just to explain what this whole net zero thing means, is that, just like you talk about in business, you talk about net profit, right? Net income. So you're saying, when you're saying net, you're saying you take away your expenditure from your revenue, right? And then you get your net, right? You net it out. So netting out, you're taking away something from something. So net zero simply means we will continue to emit carbon, right? And then we'll offset it somehow, and then we balance it. So it's just like saying, I want to get sick today, and then I'll find a way to get well tomorrow or something. It's quite an interesting conversation, because we will talk a little bit about carbon offsetting, which is, really contentious at the moment. People are really, people are really saying, is this a way of normalizing the problem and making it less urgent, right? Because at the moment we're in a very dire situation, and let's move on. So again, this was just a puzzle to kind of get us cracking. So what do you think? What do you think here? Are companies leveraging the net zero narrative as marketing tools for brand repositioning? So again, we did extensive research on this during my MBA, and it was really interesting to see what examples existed out there of how businesses had lashed in on the climate conversation to drive business growth, without really the underlying need to drive the course, right? So this is a question to you. If you have the answer, please drop it in the chat, or whatever you think, please drop it in the chat. Do you think companies are leveraging the net zero narrative as marketing tools? Because now there are a couple of groups or associations, kind of badges, to say I'm a green company, or I'm this company, I'm a sustainable company. And, because of the awareness of climate change, the consumers, customers, clients are becoming more aware and more more aware of this whole thing, and they're beginning to hold businesses accountable to say, if you're not doing some sustainable stuff, we won't do business with you. So our businesses beginning to portray this to say, oh, we are doing it. We are the green people. We are green. We are green. We are green. Even when they're not doing it. This is up there for debate, right? And which of the three fossil fuels emits the most carbon to the atmosphere? Again, we have the three fossil fuels. We have coal, we have oil, and we have gas, natural gas, right? And clearly coal is the one that emits the most. And at the moment, I will show you some statistics when we go in a little bit. The world still depends a lot on coal, mostly to power our steam turbines, our power stations, heavy manufacturing areas. We still rely a lot on coal. So, and this is really interesting in a society aware of its limits, its finite limits, because the whole problem has come from the fact that we are experiencing we are in a world that has finite limits, right? And we have been plundering the world, plundering the earth, without caution. So when you're living as though there is no end to something. So you're taking, if I'm drinking the tea, so I'm taking this beautiful coffee Steve made for me here. Anyways, if I'm taking my coffee here, as though it never runs out, right? Then I don't need to worry about anything, do I? I don't. But if I'm taking this beautiful coffee, which I know I love so much, and I want to savor every smell of it till I finish this conversation today, then I will only want to have a quick sip, and then I'll check and I'll take another sip. That's what happens when you are in an environment, a world of finite limits. But we had led our lives in this world as though there were no limits. So we're plundering on the world, plundering on the earth, plundering on our resources, plundering on everything. And we are now becoming aware of the alarming repercussions of how we have lived the earth all the while. There's a school of thought that COVID actually came as a result of our carelessness, of how we probably have lived our lives. And you just want to go and study someone like Bill Gates. A couple of years before COVID, he warned the world that something like this was going to happen. But we were too busy plundering the earth, living our lives as though there were no finite limits. And then we had that very difficult problem. But yet again, we're just a year after COVID, we still are not acting as though there is an alarm, because there is. This is a very interesting one. What would happen if the estimates of oil in the ground is faulty and the world runs out of oil and still fails to ameliorate the polluted environment? This is really interesting, because most of the projections we have today, COPs, in all the COP events, most of the projections we have are based on an estimate of when the oil on the ground will run out. And we're saying, okay, if we keep doing this, and before the oil runs out, we're able to do this and move over to sustainable energy and stuff like that, then we'll be fine. So what if by any chance those estimates are wrong? And then we had continued living our lives like though there was no problem, and then the oil ran out, and then we're not ready for alternative energy. How catastrophic that would be, right? So these were just to kind of stir up the conversation as we move on. And then these were some interesting facts I also just thought to share as well. The coal-fired steam turbine is the predominant prime mover of electric power worldwide. So most, that 80% by some estimates. This is really interesting. That's to tell you, again, this is why I was talking about how do we generate our electricity, right? We're still at that point. But I'll tell you that I think the saying that necessity is the mother of invention has really come home in the UK at the moment. I was watching I was watching the news, sorry, the climate show on Sky News this week. And a very interesting statistics that was put out there was that within a day, the amount of energy of electricity generated from wind in the UK, we got the highest number of daily generated energy, more than half of what we use in the UK a day. We got it in a day from wind for the first time. So what probably telling us that we are now beginning to look at other ways a lot more urgently, right? There is a problem at the moment. In fact, the other day I was driving on an Uber, and because it gets dark early these days, 4 o'clock it's dark, and we're actually going. I was in an Uber with my family, and then I was just chatting with the Uberman, and it was kind of dark, and he complained that the street lights were dim, very dim, to the point that he has to use his full beam in a built-up area. So anyway, I just passed my driving test, so I know this a little bit more now. In a built-up area, you shouldn't be using your full beam. You should be using your deep beam. But with the reduced street lights, with the dimmed street lights, drivers are having to use their full beams because they need to see. In fact, he was telling me the story of a woman who no longer takes her dog for a walk in the evening because of the risk of being hit. And what's happening? We're beginning to, I think this is something I think the government is doing. They're beginning to dim the lights on the street lights just to reduce the energy. So a lot of more steps like this will be happening. We will be seeing more of them happen. And that reminds me of a friend of mine who's actually building, who has an alternative energy company, Otaski. They developed an AI-powered lamppost, really, that helps to ration light. And then, so it uses an AI thing to understand the usage of power, and then it kind of rations it and turns some off, and then repurpose the conserved energy to other areas. So it's very interesting work Otaski is doing, and well done, Philip, if you're listening on that. So non-renewable energy predicted to run out between the mid and the end of 21st century. Again, remember, these are estimates of the amount of oil in the ground, and the question is, how accurate are these estimates? How well can we rely on them? And then global demand. So these are just interesting statistics. I don't want us to, we may not need to go through all of them. So let's just move on. I think it will be really interesting to really understand this whole carbon cycle, right? To see where did we begin to have problems with the climate, because I'm of the firm belief that the way the world was created, we would have continued. We would have been sufficient if we had continued to play by the rules. So I think at some point we decided to play out of the rules somehow, and then now we're left to rule the decisions and things that we've done. So just look at this. This is a very simple pictorial of the whole carbon cycle, right? How you have the trees, the photosynthesis, the sunlight coming down on the trees. You have the leaves of the trees decaying and going back into the soil, which eventually form the fossils and the fossil fuels that we use. We explore these back again and become our, the energy, the oil we use. And then it's like a cycle, right? So there is the part where you need to capture more carbon, and then these ones, definitely you have the ones that go into the soil. But if you look at this beautiful kind of cycle, this is the way it was supposed to be. This is the way God created it, right, to happen, to be. And then until we began to do this, which is exploration. We started exploring without really imagining. So was supposed to go at a pace, at a regular pace, right? And when we started doing this, we had the option of improving this pace in a way that the fossil fuels will be replenished, so to say. But again, funny enough, this is non-renewable, so it really cannot be replenished. You're plundering what's there. You really can't replenish it at the pace at which, it was supposed to be. So it was when we started exploration in mass, that was when we started having, more emissions go out. So exploration, manufacturing, you have a lot of things going on here that causes, and when you look at it, really, I was just looking at some statistics as well, and I saw that China has the highest amount of emitted carbon emission. And you will want to really understand, most of what we use around the world today comes from China, right? And so it's the whole production, the whole manufacturing, and stuff like that is eventually putting us. So you see, this is the source of our problems, right? And stuff like that. So net zero has now been normalized. So we'll talk a little bit about normalization of this, how businesses have, started the process of listening and trying to, act as though they were real-time partners in solving this problem. And then how did they eventually normalize it? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then the whole carbon offset, we'll talk a little bit about it when we go in there. So, but we can just, burn the fossil fuels now and offset later, So that's the whole conversations of net zero, right? It all lies around of, carbon offset, right? To say, how can we continue living our lives like we don't care today? And it's just like saying, let's the last time I was on the show, we're talking about the falling pounds, right? And then we talked about how the borrowing of government impacted the falling pounds, and how the fact that the government's borrowing was not accounted for, that led to the market crash. And then, there were schools of thought then that said that government was borrowing for our children to pay back. So that's exactly what happens with carbon offset, right? Because there are a lot of conversations around that. We'll say, okay, let's just continue to live our lives, right? We will eventually find a way to offset it somehow, right? We'll net it off. And once there is a possibility of that net off, which we're talking about, people's lifestyles won't change. People's attitude won't change, because they feel like, okay, fine, we'll plunder this, we'll use the proceeds to offset it, right? And then we forget that there are some irreparable damages that are happening to the earth that we may not be able to completely offset. So that's an argument out there. There are some people who believe we shouldn't be talking net zero, which is the whole offsetting, right? But we should be talking real zero. And when you're talking real zero, which is, some will argue it is not practicable to talk real zero, because that means we need to shut down everything today just so that we can start afresh. But I think the real conversation would be, should we begin to pay more attention to real zero than just talking a lot more about net? Netting means that, we continue to live our lives as though there is no problem. We do what we like. We just spend the money and throw the money to some offset project and tell them to go and plant some trees in Africa. Does that really solve it? Again, it's a question of which part of the divide do you fall in, right? And planting trees can offset the industrial emissions, reliance on the future technologies. So there are a number of things that we will see in the Paris Agreement. A key part of the conversation in Paris was that the world needs to really start innovating, right? We need to come up with new technologies, just like the one Philip, my friend, I talked about with Otaski, is developing. We need to start developing new technologies that would help the world, limit the amount of carbon emissions, and eventually reduce the rate at which the world is getting warm. at the moment, the goal is to reduce global warming below 2 degrees by 2050, if I'm correct. And then we are seeing the impacts of that. Even at the moment, we're seeing that I think it's at about 1.7 at the moment, if I'm not mistaken. And at this level, we're having a lot of, and I'll tell you a typical example of what happens when the world gets warmer. So we have what we call glaciers around different parts of the world, right? And when the world begins to get more warmer, what happens is that they begin to melt into the sea, and then what happens, a very direct impact is that they increase the water level in the seas, and then that's where you begin to see things like flooding and a lot of. So we just told you today that a third of Pakistan is underwater at the moment. Nigeria is experiencing its worst flooding in a decade, right? There could be other things people want to attribute to it, but we are seeing melting glaciers by the day. Glaciers are melting, by the day. So that's another thing, another quick understanding of what happens when the world continues to get warmer and warmer and warmer. And if we're not able to stem that, we will see. In fact, it was Boris Johnson was addressing a group in Egypt today. He's attending COP27. And he mentioned that this summer we experienced 40 degrees centigrade in London. This is the first time ever. So we're seeing a lot of firsts. We don't know what next year, holds for us. So should we begin to take action? The answer is definitely yes. So discovery of more oil fields. So people, we're still living our lives like there is no problem. So let's just go a little bit faster. I think have quite a little bit more to cover. So the Paris Agreement, right? This is all where, let's say, this is where we became conscious, right, of what the problems were. And this was in 2015. It was actually COP21. And it's now popularly known as the Paris Agreement, because that was where a lot of agreements, a lot of decisions were made as to how we were going to solve this problem, this wicked problem, how we were going to start making effort to solve this wicked problem. Part of, I was listening to the outgoing COP26 chairman yesterday, Sharma, and Alok Sharma, and he said, Paris gave us the agreement. Glasgow allowed us to deliberate on them. Now we need Egypt for implementation. So you can see we're making progress, no doubt, but are we going at the pace? I was also listening to Emmanuel Macron, talk today, about the responses of the developed countries, in terms of, because part of the Paris Agreement is that developed countries will provide $100 billion annually until 2025, and they will provide it to the developing countries to be able to recover, lost lands and and do a lot of things to help with this cause, right? So Emmanuel Macron was talking about that today, and he said, while it is easy for us to look at the many other problems and kind of prioritize others over climate, there is that need for us to keep our eyes on the ball. So everyone is talking about the global crisis right now, food crisis, energy crisis, the war in Ukraine, the impact and stuff like that. So it's easy for everyone to focus on those. But while these are happening, and the funny thing is that climate doesn't pause. Climate issues don't pause, right? They take their turn when they take their turn, right? There was the global crisis and Pakistan is under the water. The global crisis is going on and Nigeria is experiencing the hardest floods, within the last decade. So these things will still continue to happen. That's why irrespective of what the world is going through, we need to be focusing on solutions, however little, but we need to be seen to be doing something. So you can see at the Paris Agreement, a lot was agreed. It was agreed that we need to keep global global temperatures below 2 degrees. It was also agreed that all countries will report regularly. Countries were also expected to go back and make their decisions. It's called the national, what was it again, NDC or so, a national decision. I can't remember the, the last thing there. But countries were asked to go back and decide on their targets and come back and report, and then it was agreed that every 5 years, those targets will be updated. The first one was in 2015. The next one happened, I think it happened in Glasgow, because I'm not so sure we had COP 2020, but again, I don't want to misinform anyone, but it's every 5 years, the update happens, and then it's reviewed and implemented. So this is it about Paris. So another quick thing we want to look at is, how are businesses responding to this challenge? Really? Because you may be a business person and you're asking, what is in this for me? Why should I care? Because we've seen very high profile people really say the whole climate issue is a fraud. As high as the former US president, Donald Trump, I don't know if he does now, but he didn't believe in climate change. And there are so many other high-profile people who don't believe in this problem, But you just don't need to look so far to see the implications happening around the world. So, how are businesses responding to this grand challenge? That's a quick question, because in the whole climate response, there are 3 key actors: government, businesses, and individuals. So let's look at the role of businesses, because in my opinion, businesses have the most impact because they control the economy. As far as I'm concerned, they control the markets. Remember what happened in fact, the businesses are beginning to have more power than governments. During my MBA, I did quite a bit of research into corporate citizenships, how some businesses, some companies are bigger than some nations. So where they operate, the governments actually go to them to get approvals to implement some laws, because these guys are wealthy, they have the money, they control the market. You can see easily what happened in the UK. A fiscal policy went out, and then a vote of confidence was passed in the market, and then that government was no more within a week. So the businesses have huge potentials here, huge powers. If we must make any difference in, sorry, I just take this. If we must make any difference in solving climate change, then businesses must be at the forefront. But the challenge is that over time, historically, businesses have adopted a way of responding to grand challenges like this, because this is one of the big challenges we've had in the past. We've had the financial crisis, we've had world wars, we've had different grand challenges, right? This is another grand challenge, and even a bigger one, really. So over the time, it's been known, and this, what I'm about to share now is from a paper, an article written by Wright and Nyberg. They were writing, how do businesses respond to grand challenges? And then, they were talking a little bit about how businesses have responded to this whole problem. Even COVID was a grand challenge as well, right? COVID was a grand challenge as well. So Wright and Nyberg are actually, they developed a model to say that businesses usually would start with framing the problem. So when there is a problem, when there is a challenge, because at every point in time, businesses are looking out for opportunities, right? They're looking at, how do we exploit opportunities? When we talk about strategy, we're talking about all that. We're looking at how to maneuver the market, right? How to maneuver competitors, how to have a competitive advantage. That's the mindset of every business. In fact, it was, Ed Freeman or so, who said the purpose of business is profit. So that's a mindset of business. They want to make money. So, and have, the danger now with this kind of grand challenge is if we go into this climate change issue with the sole intent of money making, then we will probably cause more problems than solving. And this is what Wright and Nyberg are saying, that, when there is a grand challenge like this, businesses will first of all frame it. They want to make sense of it. That's all about framing. They want to make sense. What is this? So they go on about, kind of doing some research. What is this problem about? What is it? What's the risk? What's the opportunity? What is this really? So they're framing it. They're trying to make sense of the problem. And then the next thing they do is they try to localize it. Okay, so this is the global view of climate change. How does it impact our business, our day-to-day business? How does it impact us? Where do we come in? In fact, they start doing business cases. Business people want to know for every action, is there a business case here? What do we need to do? And stuff. So they're assessing it based on their situation. So I'm a manufacturer. What part of my value chain does it impact? They're localizing the problem, right? And most times during the framing stage, you see them come up with brandings, communication to say, oh, we're doing this. Oh, we're doing this. We're trying to make sense of this. We're doing this. So they kind of make a lot of noise around the framing and localizing. But what then happens is that after it's like it goes up, there's this huge interest and it looks like they're doing something. And then they've caught the eyes of the market. They want to leverage that attention to drive more business. And then the next thing that happens is they go back to business as usual, which is the normalizing. And that was why we said in the previous slide, we were saying something like, have businesses normalized the whole climate change problem? Is that what is happening? Have we gone back to business as usual, where we now very easily embrace offsetting, right? So let's continue with our plundering. Let's continue with our exploration. There are a lot of protests happening. There was the ones happening in London, the Just Stop Oil folks. There are a lot of protests happening. Say, can we begin to look at this whole oil thing? We are still plundering the earth. We are still exploring. In fact, we are still granting licenses for new exploration sites. At the moment, that's still happening. Companies are still going right there into the sea to develop new. In fact, up till 2030, we still have licenses going out. So, and then we're doing all that, and we say, okay, then we'll take the monies, and then we'll go and build and offset them somewhere. And then in this whole offset conversation comes the integrity of those offset projects. In fact, there was a conversation I was going to, I think it was on the climate show of Sky News, where they were talking about, people are becoming wary of this offset project. So if you go online, just type offset project, you will see a lot of them where you can easily offset your carbon emissions. So if you take you fly, you take a plane, you already calculate the number of emissions allocated to you for flying that aircraft, and then you go back to that project, you can pay some money for them to offset it for you somewhere. And then the real question is there any accountability around those offset whatever? That's another question. Are we able to ensure that those offset incomes are going to where they're meant to be, right? So those are many, many questions that happen within the whole net zero kind of conversations. But this is just to share with you the mindset of the typical business or typical company. The first thing is to frame the problem, localize it, and then normalize it. But it's important to note that if you are a business, right, you may want to begin to know that consumers are becoming aware. They know businesses that are normalizing, that are going back to business as usual. Now is not the time to play to the gallery or to think that the consumers are not aware. They are very much aware. You will begin to see the impact on your bottom line. So I would usually say, there are still opportunities, genuine opportunities for us to do good business within this climate value chain, genuine opportunities. And that's where I will usually encourage businesses to look at. So these are examples of, and these are 2021 data. I'm not sure, I don't know how updated they are, but again, we did this research in 2021. Bristol Airport, for instance, our carbon roadmap sets out how we will achieve our ambition to be a net zero airport, including becoming carbon neutral for our direct emissions by 2025. And the key question here was, for airplanes, for aircrafts, there are indirect emissions that happen. How are those being captured? So and this calls to the question of the estimates that we have, the mechanisms, the governance we have to measure emissions and the targets. Are they really foolproof? Because most of what is being reported are direct emissions. There is the indirect emissions that happen. Right, so a typical example is the aircraft is only measuring the emissions of the airplane on the air, on the skies. Right, what happens to the staff who has to drive their cars to the office? What happens to different kinds of other things that feed into that plane going on the sky? Those are the indirect, for that business, those are the indirect carbon emissions. What happens to them? Who accounts for them? So that's another key question. Are we really using the right metrics to measure this? Are we up for a surprise? Could something happen and then we will find ourselves in a place where we have been calculating with the wrong things? And then this is for Shell as well. Royal Dutch Shell today confirmed, this was in 2021, confirmed to appeal a ruling issued by the district court in The Hague in May 2021 that Shell must reduce global net carbon. So you see a company like Shell, and in fact, this was a key part of my research in 2021 when, it was in the news everywhere. They went into this litigation and, the courts insisted that they reduced their carbon emissions by 45% by 2020, and they went to appeal it. In fact, this was sending out a very clear, disturbing message to everyone, right? And so these are the kinds of responses. So Barclays, for instance, in 2021 as well, there was mixed reaction as just 14% were in favor of Barclays climate resolution. So, when some people ask the question, what's the role of banks in this whole thing? One of the key blocks, or one of the key blocks of the Paris Agreement was financing, climate finance, sustainable finance, right? Sustainable finance. Because for us to be able to do all these things we need to do to get ourselves climate ready, we need to spend money. We need to invest in R&D. We need to do innovations. We need to deploy new technologies. We need to plant trees, because seems to be the easiest one everyone is doing. We need to do a lot of things, right? And it requires funding. In fact, I've been considering, because again, I'm looking to do a PhD program soon. A key part of my conversations, or what I've been thinking, is to look at sustainable finance, because I think that's a big problem right now. I'm a finance person anyway, so I've been looking at how do we ensure that the world is able to fund its way through this problem, right? Creating, managing, and distributing the wealth we need within that space, and so on. So just running a little bit faster now. So there are plans. The government has put up plans. The UK government is doing a lot. In fact, our president, prime minister, Rishi is in Egypt at the moment. I don't know if he has done his address, but I think he was billed to speak today as well. But Rishi is there, and one of the key things and he did this. Most of these things government did were actually done by him when he was the chancellor of the Exchequer. So the government seems to be really doing a lot. Spending a lot of money trying to, and I think it was really important for the UK to have hosted Glasgow, because it seemed that it helped us rev up our preparedness for renewable energy, in as if we knew something was going to happen with the global energy market. So somehow we're not there, but we're a little more better prepared to face the future in terms of. So there are a lot of things the government is doing, but the question is it enough? That's the question. The key question is this enough? So we've looked at businesses, though we'll look a little bit more about imperatives for businesses, but is this enough really, in terms of. So in COP27, it's happening now. There is focus on implementation. So a lot has been agreed. NDCs have been updated. A lot of in Glasgow in COP26, one of the key things coming out there was it became kind of mandatory for companies and countries to report their emissions, mostly companies to report their emissions, and a lot of all that happening. So there is now the focus on implementation, ensuring that all the agreements of Glasgow and Paris are being executed. And I must tell you, in the whole value chain of problem solving, delivery is the most difficult. Implementation, execution, that's the most difficult. So I can only wish the countries of the world the best of luck in this next phase. So you can see a lot of things are happening. Decarbonization plan, a lot of monies are being put into R&D, green jobs, and stuff like that. So quite a lot the government is doing. So the point is, who should really be responsible? Like I said, there are three key actors: government, business, and you. So who should be doing this? So let's look at the role of the individuals. This is not exhaustive. Again, this was just on the spot thinking. There's a role we all have, and this reminds me of one of my teachers, my lecturers during my MBA program, Peter Edwards. Peter actually. And Peter, if you're listening, thank you so much for what you did during the MBA. He actually did shape our thinking. He taught us a course called Corporate Social Responsibility, but he didn't teach a normal corporate social responsibility program. He took it way beyond that to say, what was the role of business, right, in solving grand challenges? Because eventually what we usually do with CSR is that we weaponize it. We use it as a business strategy. And that has been the way businesses, and let's even look at where corporate social responsibility started from. Businesses needed to do more within societies where they operated, right? So in a way to give back to society, they began to add conditions to those, and only do it in areas where they can get more. And that's using the business mind to do that. But Peter tried to teach us what about this finite nature of our planet, and how businesses need to come in and be responsible businesses, and do things right. So, but in terms of individuals, and why I mentioned Peter here was that Peter talked a little bit about the role of individuals. He kept on telling us how we as individuals are part of the problem as well. So there is this trend that you don't use something for more than a year or 6 months or whatever. So this summer you go get summer clothes, and then the next summer you get another set of summer clothes, and you discard the others. And when we look at this is also a way of not helping the climate, because most of the materials we use for production are gotten from earth resources, right? Your clothes, cotton, your appliances from the trees, from whatever. And once we keep doing this, what's happening is that we are distorting more the natural course of carbon cycle. And then we are having to do more productions, more carbon emissions, and you can see the cycle, it just keeps going round. So what happens to using one shoe that you've been wearing for a longer time? Why buy a new shoe when the old one is not bad? I'm not saying it's not good to be fancy, but again, the question should always be, is there anything wrong with what I'm using? Why discard it for another thing? And then how we dispose our waste also matters. There's, a lot of waste find themselves in wrong places, in drainages, also impacting the free flow of water and impacting flooding and all that. So it's a cycle. It's a cycle. And so what's the responsibilities? I talked about carbon offsetting. Is this something you believe in? But beyond that, even if you don't believe in carbon offsetting, you should begin to understand that if you don't believe in generating carbon, emitting carbon and then offsetting it, then you should believe in not emitting, only emitting in the barest minimum, really, the barest minimum. So things like if you must commute to work, the rides to work, cycle to work, take the train, and then if you must do short journeys, you don't need to drive, take a walk. And Ashley does this a lot, and Ashley is one of the presenters on this platform. She Ashley taught me how to work. In fact, the first time we went together to her office, we walked from Heaton, where we were staying, we're close, almost neighbors. We walked down to the city center at her office, and we enjoyed the walk because while we were doing that, we were just chit-chatting and discussing. And she actually gave me that. I love walking anyway, but she validated again that zeal to do that. So these are little things we do that can help the environment. If you must go out, walk around, use your cycle to work, cycle to where you want to go to, except it's extremely important. And I've talked about the reusability of our things. Yeah. Excuse me. So in closing, really, what are the imperatives for businesses, really? So if you're a business person, what is in this for you? What is in this for you? And like I talked about Otaskis already, who's done a massive work on energy savings. It's called the intuitive technology, the lamp host they've developed that helps ration energy and save energy for more important other things. So businesses can begin to think about, how do we function? How do we innovate? How do we do things within climate? The climate space is in dire need of innovations at the moment. How can we get to this goal, right? When COVID came, people rose up to the occasion and were able to get the vaccine in record time. We need that kind of zeal. We need that kind of push. But with the climate, it's a little bit difficult for us to understand the urgency. COVID ensured that we all stayed in-house and people were dying. So that was a lot more, but with this, people are feeling like we still have some time. There are also food technology, new kinds of ways we can begin to treat our meals, our feeding. There's Corn Foods. I love what they do. Corn Foods, they're into these vegan meals. But again, they're very innovative in the way they go about this as well. And then businesses need to begin to reimagine their business models just to suit this whole climate sustainability stuff. Working from home is a good way to do that, because what you do is that you reduce the number of people commuting to work. You begin to have climate budgets. When you're developing your budgets in the beginning of the year, set out a certain amount of money to drive climate activities within your company. Sustainable sourcing in your procurements. How are you ensuring that you're sourcing from the right people? Incentivize good manufacturers who are green, than those who are plundering the earth. When those who are green get incentivized, get more businesses, they will be empowered to do more, right? Those are kind of things we need to be doing. Green finance, there's what is called the green asset ratio. In fact, this year it's becoming mandatory for banks and lenders financial institutions to declare what their green asset ratio is. So this means that these things are becoming more topical, and then, like I said, the whole right to work schemes, and like I said earlier, and I'm rounding up now, the initial things we talked about, at COP27 opening yesterday were around collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. One company may not be able to do it, but if you come together, because this is a social cause, we can do more together. So in any case, what should the future of net zero look like? So like we said, short-term goals and accountability. People need to be held accountable for their actions. People need to be held accountable for their actions. Fossil fuel production has to stop now. I guess this is giving some form of credence to the Just Stop Oil protesters. But again, the goal really is that we need to start playing down that more and pay more attention to alternative energy, renewable energy. Power and politics have to give way for science and legal. So we see a lot of politics happening in this, in the response to this grand challenge. We need to begin to leave politics where it belongs. A typical example of how politics affects a lot of things is the World Cup is coming up this month, and a lot of people are focusing on some other thing about Qatar other than the sports. And I heard the FIFA president saying, please, can we please focus on the sport? Governance and monitoring, the compliance should be put in place. I think that's happening now, and we're going to see more at the end of COP27. Recalibration of the targets with realistic action plans to reach them, and then focus on reporting across the value chain of the carbon footprint. This is a very important one, and this is where I'm going to drop it here. The value chain of the carbon footprint, and not just the direct emission. There has to be a holistic view, just so that we can be sure that we're reporting the right things. And friends, this is where we're going to drop it today. I've enjoyed myself. I totally love, speaking around climate. It's an area I like, and I think it's a topical one for us in the world today. We need to begin to pay attention to it. We need to begin to, do something. Everyone has a role to play. Everyone has a role to play in this. And so till we meet again next time. And just before I leave, just to, speak a little bit quickly about the Purple Sock Day on the 3rd of December. So we're celebrating International Day of Persons with Disability. This is an initiative of Roadmap MBA in partnership with Parallel. Parallel is a company, one of our partners here. And these are purple socks that has been paid for anyway. So we'll be giving them out to people on, within our network. So this is just to create awareness. The 3rd of December is the Day of Persons with Disabilities. So thank you very much for listening in, and thank you so much for your comments there. I'm sorry again, each time I keep doing this. I'm sorry I didn't pick up on anyone's, but thank you, and thank you. And until we see again next time, stay safe and stay green. Thank you.